You expected a warm family gathering where laughter blended with the clinking of glasses, where fond memories came alive again. But instead, you were met with a moment that turned your whole world upside down. Amid the sparkling lights and the familiar scent of food, a sudden remark echoed, as if you were merely an outsider lucky enough to sit at that table. The room remained lively, but for you, time stood still. Behind the smiles and familiar gazes, a quiet secret surfaced, opening a new chapter in a story you never thought you'd have to write, your very own family revenge story. If you've ever felt abandoned within your own family, stay with us until the end. This story will keep you glued to the screen. The moment those words fell from your mother's lips, you felt as though the ground beneath you shifted. The laughter and chatter around the table blurred, replaced by the ringing echo of a truth you had known all along but never dared to admit. You were never truly part of their circle. That one sentence didn't just bruise you, it unlocked a floodgate of memories, each one carrying whispers of the same message. You don't belong here. Long before that brunch, the signs had always been there. As a child, you believed family was a shield, a promise that no matter how cold the world outside became, you would always have a place inside. Summers at the lake cabin gave you that illusion. You remember running barefoot across the wooden floorboards, the scent of pine clinging to the air, and your grandmother's voice reading stories that seemed to stretch the night into forever. She was your safe harbor, the one who told you again and again. Dignity is the only inheritance worth keeping. You didn't fully understand it then, but the words took root in your heart. When Nathan was born, the dynamic began to change. You were old enough to remember the shift, how conversations that once centered around your small triumphs suddenly revolved around him. Every smile your parents gave him seemed brighter, every word of praise louder. At first, you thought it was natural, that younger children deserved more attention. But as the years rolled on, it became clear. He wasn't just their son. He was their pride, their hope, their future. Birthdays revealed the difference most starkly. Yours came with modest cakes and a few wrapped gifts, while Nathan's celebrations transformed into grand events, filled with decorations, guests, and endless photographs. At family gatherings, relatives would lean toward him, asking about his grades, his sports, his plans, while you sat quietly, waiting for someone to notice you. At school, you worked hard, not to outshine him, but to prove yourself worthy in your own right. You earned grades that should have drawn admiration, won small competitions that should have sparked pride. But at home, those achievements were brushed aside. If Nathan had accomplished less, it was explained away as bad luck or timing. If you had accomplished more, it was met with silence or worse, a reminder not to make comparisons. Slowly, you learned to retreat. You told yourself you didn't mind. You convinced yourself that being the quiet one had its benefits, that you could slip by without the crushing weight of expectation. But inside, you longed for acknowledgement, for even the smallest gesture that said you mattered as much as he did. The cabin became your refuge. While Nathan basked in attention, you slipped into the library, its shelves lined with your grandmother's books. You spent hours there, losing yourself in stories that carried you to places where you weren't invisible, where your worth wasn't measured by how loudly you demanded it. In those quiet corners, you could breathe. When your grandmother passed, the air in the family seemed to shift once more. The woman who had been your anchor was gone, and with her went the balance that kept the household steady. The cabin, once filled with laughter and warmth, grew tense with whispered conversations and unspoken decisions. You noticed your mother's eyes hardening, her words sharpening. Appearances mattered more to her than affection, legacy more than loyalty. Your father followed her lead, though less directly. He wasn't cruel, but his silence was its own betrayal. When choices were made that hurt you, he looked away. When Nathan stumbled, he rushed to cushion the fall. And when you stood your ground, insisting you deserved the same fairness, his silence told you everything you needed to know. Through it all, you endured. For 35 years, you played the role they assigned you, the quiet child, the afterthought. You gave more than you received. You remembered their birthdays, brought small gifts, offered help whenever it was needed. When bills came due, you contributed quietly, though your name was rarely mentioned when they spoke of responsibility. When Nathan faltered, you picked up the pieces. And still, your efforts went unrecognized. There were moments when you almost convinced yourself that was enough, that unconditional love meant giving without expecting anything in return. But deep down, the imbalance gnawed at you. You couldn't escape the truth. Your sacrifices were invisible, while Nathan's mistakes were excused, even praised. The contrast grew sharper with time. Nathan's charm carried him far, but beneath the surface, you saw what others refused to see. Recklessness. Money slipped through his hands like water, ventures failed as quickly as they began, debts piled high. And each time, your parents stepped in to shield him, to preserve his image, no matter the cost. You, on the other hand, were held to a different standard. Every misstep you made, no matter how small, was magnified. If you hesitated, you were ungrateful. If you set boundaries, you were selfish. If you dared to ask for fairness, you were told you didn't understand what family meant. By the time of that fateful brunch, you had endured decades of being unseen, unheard, unchosen. Yet a small part of you still hoped that one day they would acknowledge your loyalty, your contributions, your worth. That morning, as you dressed, you told yourself you could survive another family meal. You braced for Nathan's exaggerated stories, your mother's pointed remarks, your father's silent approval of it all. You told yourself you were strong enough to endure. But nothing could have prepared you for the words she chose. When your mother leaned across the table, her eyes cold and sharp, and declared, "You're lucky we even include you," close quote, it wasn't just an insult. It was a verdict. It was the culmination of every dismissal, every silence, every slight that had marked your life. The fork in your hand slipped. The laughter continued around you, but it no longer touched you. No one defended you. No one contradicted her. They all moved on, as if nothing had happened, as if your worth could be decided so casually. In that moment, something inside you shifted. The ache that had lived in you for so long began to harden. You felt your grandmother's voice rise from memory. Dignity is the only inheritance worth keeping. For the first time, you understood. You didn't need their validation. You didn't need their approval. What you needed was to reclaim what had been yours all along. Your dignity. That brunch didn't break you. It revealed you. And as you walked away that day, their voices fading behind you, you carried with you not the weight of humiliation, but the spark of transformation. What began as a wound would soon become your greatest weapon. This wasn't the end of your story. It was the beginning of your family revenge story. You left the brunch with your chest tight, carrying a silence heavier than any words you could have spoken. The house around you seemed smaller that evening, the walls pressing in, as if they too had heard your mother's declaration and agreed. You tried to convince yourself it was just a cruel slip, but deep down you knew it wasn't the beginning of something new, it was the end of something you had been denying for years. Days passed, but the sting didn't fade. Every time you closed your eyes, you saw her expression, the cold certainty in her voice. And every time, it brought back more memories not just of the brunch, but of countless moments when you had been sidelined, minimized, erased. Yet what cut deeper than memory was what came next. One afternoon, you found yourself back at the cabin, hoping to breathe in the scent of pine and old paper, to remind yourself that there was still one corner of the world untouched by their dismissiveness. But as you stepped into the library, you noticed papers spread across the desk, blueprints, contracts, sketches. At first, you thought they were repairs. Then your eyes caught the words. Demolition, renovation, conversion. You froze. The room you had loved since childhood, the library your grandmother had filled with books and stories, was marked for destruction. In its place, a modern lounge, a design stamped with Nathan's name at the top. Your heart pounded. You sifted through the papers, each line of ink confirming what your mind refused to believe. They weren't preserving your grandmother's legacy, they were erasing it, just as they had tried to erase you. The next morning, you confronted your mother. Holding the documents in your hands, you demanded an explanation. She barely looked at them. Her eyes, sharp as glass, met yours as she said, "That space is wasted. Nathan has plans for it. He knows how to move us forward." The word wasted echoed in your chest like a blow. Wasted, was that what she thought of the summers you had spent there, of the nights your grandmother read to you by lantern light, of the memories that shaped who you were? Before you could answer, Nathan walked in, his grin wide, his steps confident. He glanced at the papers in your hands and laughed lightly. "You love it once it's done. The place will finally serve a purpose." Serve a purpose. The words burned. You wanted to scream that the cabin already had a purpose, that it had been a sanctuary long before his designs, that it had been your only refuge when the family left you in shadows. But the look on their faces told you everything. To them, your voice was an inconvenience, an obstacle in the way of Nathan's ambition. That night, you lay awake staring at the ceiling. The ache inside you was no longer just about being left out of brunches or ignored at dinners. It was about losing the last tangible piece of the one person who had truly seen you. The library wasn't just a room. It was proof that you belonged somewhere. And now they were taking even that. The injustice was unbearable. In the days that followed, you began to notice more. Nathan's calls, whispered urgently in corners. His excuses, piling high with every conversation. The way your parents looked at him, not with doubt, but with desperate belief, as if admitting the truth would unravel everything they had built. You saw what they refused to see. Nathan wasn't building a future. He was digging a hole, one reckless decision at a time. Still, every time you tried to point it out, they silenced you. Your father said you were exaggerating. Your mother told you not to meddle. And Nathan smirked, knowing he held their unwavering loyalty. The double standard was impossible to ignore. When you set boundaries, you were selfish. When you raised concerns, you were bitter. But when Nathan failed, he was brave. When he stumbled, he was misunderstood. It became clear. The brunch hadn't been an isolated cruelty. It had been the truth spoken aloud at last. You weren't part of their vision of family, you were the distraction they tolerated. And yet, amid the hurt, something inside you began to shift. Instead of breaking, you hardened. Instead of pleading, you listened. You stopped wasting breath on arguments they would never hear. Instead, you watched. You took note of the debts Nathan tried to hide, the contracts that vanished into thin air, the promises he couldn't keep. Piece by piece, you built a silent ledger of the truth they refused to face. One afternoon, as you stood in the library, your hand on the shelves your grandmother once touched, you whispered into the stillness, "They won't erase this. They won't erase me." The vow settled deep inside you, heavier than anger, sharper than grief. It wasn't about revenge in the way they might have feared. It was about reclaiming dignity. It was about ensuring that what your grandmother entrusted you and what life had taught you would not vanish under someone else's blueprint. The brunch had wounded you. The demolition plans had enraged you. But together, they had awakened something stronger than both. Resolve. You would not beg to be seen. You would not plead to be included. You would build your own place, your own power, and your own story. And when the time came, they would finally understand the cost of underestimating you. The vow you whispered in the library echoed in your chest every day that followed. It was no longer just a sentence, it was a shield, a fire, a compass pulling you toward a truth you could no longer ignore. You began to notice Nathan's veneer unraveling. The charm that once dazzled relatives now seemed forced. His laughter carried an edge, too loud, too brittle. When the phone rang, he answered in hushed tones, retreating. Your mother leaned forward, her voice bright. "Nathan has been working tirelessly. His next project will put us on the map." You set your fork down, your pulse steady. This was the moment. "What project is that exactly?" Close quote. The room stilled. Your question was sharp, deliberate. Nathan froze, his glass hovering midair. Your father shifted uncomfortably. You continued, your voice calm but unyielding. "Because from what I've seen, there are no investors. No contracts. Only mounting debts. Am I wrong?" Close quote. Nathan's smile faltered. For the first time, the mask slipped. Your mother bristled, her tone clipped. "That's enough. We won't tolerate baseless accusations." But you didn't flinch. "It's not an accusation, it's fact. I've seen the letters. I've heard the calls. Nathan isn't saving this family. He's sinking it." The words landed like stones. Your father's fork clattered against his plate. Nathan sputtered, fumbling for excuses, his usual charm collapsing under the weight of your calm certainty. And in that silence, you felt the shift. For years, they had dismissed your voice. Now, they couldn't look away. The dinner unraveled in chaos, your mother raising her voice, Nathan pleading, your father staring at the table in shame. You didn't need to shout. You simply sat there, steady, letting the truth speak louder than the storm around you. That night, your mother cornered you in the hallway. Her face was pale, her voice sharp but trembling. "Why are you doing this? We're supposed to be a family." You met her gaze evenly. A family doesn't erase one of its own. A family doesn't destroy what should be preserved. You chose Nathan's comfort over truth. "I won't let you erase what's left." She opened her mouth to argue, but no words came. For the first time, she had no shield strong enough to cover reality. Days later, the facade collapsed further. Calls came from creditors, voices raised through the phone lines, demands no longer hidden. Your parents scrambled to contain the fallout, but it was too late. The truth they had denied was now undeniable. You didn't gloat. You didn't celebrate. Instead, you focused on what mattered. Protecting the library. You filed the paperwork, securing your grandmother's will. You gathered signatures, ensuring that the cabin and everything it represented couldn't be touched without your consent. The library became more than a room. It became proof that you had always belonged, even when they refused to see it. One evening, your father entered quietly as you worked among the shelves. He looked older than you remembered, his shoulders heavy with regret. His voice was low, rough. "We were wrong." The words landed softly, like a door finally opening. You didn't answer immediately. Years of hurt couldn't be undone in 3 words. But you nodded, acknowledging the shift. Your mother never said the same. Pride kept her silent, even as the truth unraveled around her. But her silence no longer pierced you. You no longer needed her words to define you. Nathan's world crumbled piece by piece. Projects failed, promises dissolved, the charm that once shielded him evaporated. He looked smaller now, not the giant shadow you had lived under for decades, but a man undone by his own choices. And you stood taller. Not with arrogance, not with cruelty, but with the quiet steadiness of someone who had endured and emerged whole. The brunch had humiliated you. The demolition plans had enraged you. But this moment of clarity transformed you. Your family revenge story wasn't about tearing them down. It was about standing in the light they tried to deny you. And for the first time, you realized. You didn't need them to include you. You had already carved out your place. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered in the silence that followed. Days stretched into weeks, and the house that once pulsed with Nathan's stories now felt strangely hollow. Conversations were shorter, dinners quieter, and the air heavy with unspoken truths. Nathan no longer strutted into rooms with his usual bravado. His phone calls dwindled, his excuses ran thin, and the shine that once blinded your parents dulled into shadows. Without the illusion of success, he looked smaller, just a man weighed down by choices he could no longer escape. You didn't gloat. Watching him unravel didn't bring you joy, only clarity. For so long, you had been told you were less, while he was praised as more. But now, the roles reversed, not because you destroyed him, but because the truth revealed itself. Your mother tried to carry on as if nothing had changed. She filled silences with forced smiles, grasped at scraps of control. Sometimes, she looked at you as if she wanted to say something, but pride sealed her lips. She couldn't admit aloud what her eyes already betrayed. She had misjudged you, underestimated you, and chosen blindness over fairness. Your father's shift was quieter. He spoke less but listened more. Occasionally, you caught him watching you, not with disappointment, but with a kind of weary respect. The night he whispered we were wrong remained between you, but you felt its weight every time he glanced your way. And then there was you. You no longer moved through rooms like a ghost, waiting to be noticed. You stood steady, present, unshaken by their silence. You poured yourself into the library, repairing shelves, restoring the heart of the cabin. With every nail hammered, every page dusted, you felt your grandmother's presence beside you. The library was no longer just her legacy, it was yours. Friends who visited saw the difference in you. They noticed the calm in your voice, the strength in your step. They didn't know every detail of the storm, but they sensed the transformation. You were no longer defined by absence, you were defined by resilience. Family gatherings continued, those stripped of their old sparkle. At one dinner, your mother tried to revive Nathan's image, praising his resilience and creativity. But her words floated emptily, unanchored by reality. Your father avoided her gaze, Nathan kept his eyes on his plate, and for the first time, all eyes eventually drifted to you. You didn't speak. You didn't need to. Your silence carried a weight the words never could. That was when you understood. Revenge wasn't about shouting or proving them wrong in dramatic bursts. It was about becoming undeniable. Months later, the final confirmation arrived in the form of a letter from the family attorney. The cabin, the library, was legally secured in your name. Your grandmother's will had always carried that truth, and now it was undeniable on paper. She had seen you clearly, even when others refused to. She had entrusted her legacy not to the favored son, but to the overlooked daughter. Holding that letter, you felt something inside you ease. Not triumph, not arrogance, simply peace. For years, you had carried the weight of invisibility, but here was proof that you were never invisible to the one who mattered most. Nathan faded further into the background. His ventures collapsed, his creditors grew louder, and eventually, he stopped trying to uphold the illusion. Your parents, once so quick to defend him, grew quiet too, each locked in their own reflections of regret. And you rose not with fanfare, but with quiet certainty. You had reclaimed what they tried to erase. You had proven that dignity cannot be given or taken away, it can only be lived. One afternoon, as the sun lowered over the lake, you sat on the porch of the cabin, a book in your lap. The air was cool, the water golden with reflection. For the first time, you felt truly free, not because the past had vanished, but because it no longer defined you. Your grandmother's words returned once more. Dignity is the only inheritance worth keeping. You finally understood them in full. The brunch had wounded you. The plans for demolition had enraged you. The confrontation had tested you. But through it all, you had found not only justice, but yourself. You were no longer the daughter lucky to be included. You were the woman who had risen beyond exclusion, beyond silence, beyond erasure. This was the true ending of your family revenge story. Not destruction, but resilience. Not vengeance, but freedom. And as the stars blinked into the evening sky, you whispered to yourself, not as a vow, but as truth. I was never erased. I never will be. The quiet of the cabin became the perfect ending to a chapter you never expected to write. Where once there had been noise, voices dismissing you, choices erasing you, now there was calm. The shelves of the library stood polished, filled with stories that had outlasted betrayal and denial. And in those pages, you finally saw your own reflection clearly. Resilient, steady, unbroken. You realized that your family revenge story was never about tearing others down. It was about standing tall when no one believed you could. It was about proving, to yourself most of all, that dignity isn't granted, it's claimed. Nathan faded into the background, your parents quieted into silence, but you stepped forward. You discovered peace not in their acceptance, but in your own strength. The inheritance you carried wasn't measured in property or approval, it was measured in the unshakable knowledge that you had endured and risen. As the evening sun dipped behind the trees, you whispered into the golden light. I am here. I always was. And with those words, your story